Water rights building. Upon what you learned about the bundle of rights in property ownership, water rights represent another essential component of real property law. They determine who may use water found on or beneath the land, how that water may be used, and where property boundaries end when a parcel adjoins a body of water. Water rights are complex because they involve both private ownership and state control, and their interpretation often depends on whether the water is moving or still, navigable or non-navigable. Water rights do not automatically belong to a landowner simply because water exists on or near their property. In many cases, the right to use that water may legally belong to others or even to the state itself. Water rights therefore define not only ownership and use, but also the legal boundaries of land adjoining water. For example, a homeowner along a river may not actually own the water or even the riverbed beneath it, if that river is navigable under state or federal law. Water rights, defined water rights, are a group of legal entitlements that define the ownership, control, and use of water located on, above, or beneath the land. These rights depend on three main factors: whether the state claims ownership or control over the water, whether the water is moving or stationary, and whether it is navigable. Each of these factors affects who owns the bed of the water body and who may lawfully use the water for domestic, agricultural, or commercial purposes. Navigable water. Navigable water refers to any body of water that can be used as a natural highway for commerce. Under federal and state law, navigable waters are generally considered public property. The state usually owns the bed beneath the water up to the ordinary low water mark, while the federal government retains authority to regulate navigable waters for transportation and commerce. For instance, if you own a home along the Colorado River, which is navigable, you do not own any part of the river or its bed. Your ownership stops at the water's edge. However, if you own property surrounding a small pond or lake that is entirely on your land and not navigable, you generally own the water and the bed beneath it. Ownership boundaries are therefore determined by navigability. If a waterway is navigable, the adjoining property owner's title stops at the high water line. If it is non-navigable, ownership may extend to the midpoint of the water body. These principles prevent private ownership from interfering with public rights of access and navigation. Doctrine of prior appropriation. In many Western states where water is scarce, the state holds ownership and control of all surface water under the doctrine of prior appropriation. This doctrine is based on the principle of first in time, first in right. The first person to apply water to a beneficial use, such as irrigation or domestic consumption, acquires priority over later users. Once granted, that right attaches to the property and continues as long as the water is used beneficially and without waste. Arizona adopted the doctrine of prior appropriation early in its history. Before 1919, a person could establish water rights simply by using the water and posting a notice at the diversion point. However, in 1919, the Arizona Surface Water Code, now called the Public Water Code, was enacted, requiring a formal permit for water use. Under this law, the state issues permits to individuals whose intended use is considered reasonable and beneficial. During shortages, the oldest permit holder, known as the senior appropriator, has first priority. For example, if a rancher in Yuma applied for 10,000 gallons of water in 2010, and another rancher applied for the same amount a day later, the first rancher would retain priority. If a drought reduced the available supply to 12,500 gallons, the senior rancher would receive their full 10,000 gallons, while the second rancher would only be entitled to the remaining 2,500 gallons. This first-come, first-served approach ensures fairness and efficiency in arid regions where water is limited. Littoral rights. Littoral rights concern properties abutting non-moving bodies of water such as lakes, seas, or oceans. Owners have the right to reasonable use of the water's shore for activities such as swimming, fishing, or boating, but do not own the water itself or the land beneath it. ownership extends only to the high water mark because the lake or sea is typically considered public property. For example, a beachfront property owner along the Pacific Ocean may enjoy the use of the shore, but cannot restrict public access to the water below the high tide line. Littoral rights are attached to the land and automatically transferred to new owners when the property is sold. This ensures continuity of access and use, even when ownership changes. Riparian rights. Riparian rights apply to properties bordering moving bodies of water such as rivers or streams. The extent of these rights depends on whether the water is navigable or non-navigable. If the stream is non-navigable, the property owner generally owns the land beneath the water up to the midpoint of the stream and has unrestricted use of it, provided it does not harm neighboring owners. If the waterway is navigable, the state owns the bed beneath the water, and the owner's property extends only to the water's edge. Riparian owners have the right to reasonable use of the water for natural purposes like drinking, bathing, and watering livestock, as well as certain artificial uses such as small-scale irrigation. However, these uses cannot unreasonably interfere with the rights of other riparian owners upstream or downstream. For instance, a farmer cannot dam a river to the extent that it deprives others of necessary water flow. Courts generally prioritize natural uses over artificial ones when conflicts arise. Riparian owners also typically have the right to access the water for boating, fishing, or recreation, though these rights remain subject to local and federal regulations. Riparian and littoral rights in Arizona. Arizona does not recognize riparian or littoral rights for the use of surface water. Instead, all surface water use in Arizona is governed by the doctrine of prior appropriation. However, property boundaries along navigable or non-navigable waters still follow similar legal principles. If a river or lake is navigable, ownership ends at the high water line. If it is non-navigable, ownership can extend to the midpoint. Review summary. Water rights determine how water associated with real property may be owned, used, and controlled. Navigable waters are typically owned by the state, while non-navigable waters may belong to adjoining landowners. Western states like Arizona operate under the doctrine of prior appropriation, which grants water rights to those who first put water to beneficial use, rather than those who merely own land next to it. In contrast, many other states follow common law systems of riparian and littoral rights, which grant water use privileges to owners of land bordering the water. These distinctions ensure fairness, conservation, and proper management of one of the most vital natural resources, water. Discussion. Why doesn't ownership of land automatically include ownership of the water on it? Answer. Because the state often reserves ownership or control of water resources, particularly navigable waters or surface water regulated under the doctrine of prior appropriation. How does the doctrine of prior appropriation determine water use during shortages? Answer. It gives priority to the earliest lawful user who first applied the water to a beneficial use, ensuring senior rights holders are served before junior users. What is the main difference between littoral and riparian rights? Answer. Littoral rights apply to properties bordering still water like lakes or seas, while riparian rights apply to properties bordering moving water such as rivers or streams. Why does Arizona follow the doctrine of prior appropriation instead of riparian rights? Answer. Because Arizona's arid climate requires a regulated system that prioritizes water use based on need and historical use, rather than simple land adjacency. Closing remarks. Water rights form one of the most important areas of real estate law, shaping not only property ownership but also the sustainability of communities. Whether through riparian and littoral rights in wetter regions or the doctrine of prior appropriation in arid states like Arizona, these rules balance private use with public need. Understanding water rights helps real estate professionals protect their clients' interests, define boundaries accurately, and navigate the environmental and legal complexities that come with owning property connected to water,